All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our webinar, guys. This is understanding your customer journey with Google Analytics. Before I dive into it and get through the housekeeping items and intros, I just want to thank you guys for jumping on today's call. I know that everybody's time is at a premium nowadays. It's really hard to carve out time to sit down and to visit us and to listen to our presentation. So really happy that you're here, and and encourage you guys to continue chatting and in the chat and ask questions. And I'd like to treat this very much so like a conversation and be as proactive as answering those as possible. So please do continue to jump in the chat and ask questions. But just for some housekeeping items, yes, we are recording this webinar, and we will be sending out a recording along with the deck afterwards. At the end of this presentation, there's definitely a Q&A portion. But if you have any questions while I'm talking through some of these items, please do go ahead and throw it in the chat. Either myself or my associate Chase here will flag that question with me, and we'll go ahead and jump in and tackle it as best we can. And then finally, my email address and my contact information, including my LinkedIn information, is going to be on the last slide. I'm the only Dave Fimmick in the universe too, so I'm pretty easy to dig up in terms of social connections. But feel free to connect with me on your social media platform of choice. Mostly for me, it's LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most proactive. So feel free to reach out at any time after the presentation. I work for a company called InfoTrust. Likely you heard about this webinar through InfoTrust, of course. As Chase is dropping in the chat here, we're a digital analytics consulting and technology firm. We're headquartered in Cincinnati, but we also have offices all over the world, including Chicago, Barcelona, and Dubai. We work with 30+ Fortune 500 companies all around the globe. So we provide a wealth of services, and we do have quite a number of technical partnerships. Me personally, I work quite a bit in the Google stack. I'm a lead web analytics consultant here at InfoTrust. I've been doing analysis and analytics for about 15 years now. I initially got my start in analytics and doing this sort of work actually with the US military. I was an intelligence analyst for the Navy, but I primarily worked with various different clandestine organizations such as the NSA, FBI, CIA, that sort of thing. So after I got out, I decided to pursue a career in marketing, leveraging my skill set I earned in the military. I got heavy into development work, and eventually my skill set turned into a hybrid of analysis and implementations. So I've been doing private sector work for quite some time now, about 10 years. I've delivered quite a number of presentations. I've talked to folks across thousands of different companies, many different verticals, and done so many implementations. I've forgotten them all at this point. But if you have any questions about any of my background, feel free to ask as well. So today's agenda, as I mentioned before, this is all about understanding the customer journey in relation to Google Analytics. And this is usually a great conversation to have with folks who are either just entering the industry of digital analytics or digital marketing, or even, are we still on the, oh, we're still on the title slide. Hang on just a second. There we go. So here's today's agenda. Sorry about that. As I was saying, with the customer journey, this is a great mindset to have in terms of new analysts as well as some self-trained analysts. You want to think about your data in a way that is cohesive towards the reporting and the objectives that you have on a strategic level. One of the biggest challenges I see with analysts, even advanced analysts, is tethering together the strategic objectives and goals of the company with the technical aspects of the dimensions, metrics, and data that lives within Google Analytics. So in today's webinar, we're essentially going to be walking through breaking down objectives for analysis, changing your approach to reporting, so adopting the mindset that we're talking about here, We're going to discuss the phases of a customer journey, and as well as building reports that matter to you and essentially achieve the understanding and objective that you've got. Now, when I first got started, and I'm sure a lot of the folks here on this webinar experienced the same thing, right? When you jumped into Google Analytics, there's a wealth of information at your disposal, and you're immediately presented with your very first challenge, and that is, so what? You know, who cares? I see all of these cool reports, all of this interesting information, all of these items that I want to dive into, but you know, the first thought I had was, why does it matter? Why should I care about the top 10 landing pages? Why should I look at the channels or reports? There is a ton of information out about Google Analytics and the tools themselves that teach you a lot of the how. You'll even see some of the more advanced things, you know, showing you more advanced tricks with different, you know, tools and skill sets, that sort of thing. But one of the conversations I always love to have with folks when building out teams of analysts is, you know, why it's important to look at this and how to think and approach your data. And I'm sure you guys, as well as myself, have bumped into folks either just starting in the industry or even day to day after, you know, several years or several clients or accounts of doing this, is you start getting asked, you know, sort of the similar questions. You start getting asked some of these top line, high level, 10,000 foot view questions that typically are complicated to answer and need to be explained in a manner that is consumable by non-technical people. As analysts and as people who are operating in Google Analytics and consuming this data, we are essentially we're the intelligence division of our company. We are the storytellers. We are the ones that take the quantified data of, you know, tens of thousands to millions of users and sessions and all of this information, and we have to essentially formulate it in a way that visually and strategically tells a story that meets the objectives of these questions that we've got. So I've listed out a couple of examples here, and we'll dive deep into one of these later on in the presentation. But I'm sure you've gotten these before too, like how well are we doing at bringing in new business? Which campaign is doing better, X, Y, or Z? Are customers reading our content? How is the revenue looking for product X? Are we keeping our customers coming back? Are we being successful at spreading brand awareness? These questions may originate from you as well. You may be asking yourself this information when you're initially jumping in and presented with that material. Typically, the folks that I work with, or the analysts that I work with, analysis is a means to an end. It's not the full-time job that they've got. Typically, they're there to sell widgets or earn subscribers or, you know, something in between. The analysis portion is for the purposes of measurement, optimization, and understanding. So when it comes to these questions, these top-level questions that you'll get, or these top-level questions that you have, you want to start drilling down into them and framing them in terms of specifics that you can start isolating the data within Google Analytics. So I've expanded out a few here. For example, how well are we doing at bringing in new business? Great follow-up question is, you know, what efforts are you presently undertaking? What type of user is the highest quality? In regards to campaigns, what are the objectives for those campaigns? What is your measurement of success? And that's a really big one. And that's, I think, the most important question that you're ever going to be asking someone when they ask you to conduct analysis or dig up a report or understand the data that's there. Reviewing Google Analytics data without first defining a measurement of success is not really analysis. That's just counting. You're just going through the numbers, you're just crunching them, you're just tallying them up, and you're serving it out. And that's a really difficult way to get any sort of insights out of the analysis that you're doing. Your follow-up question to any questions that you're getting analysis-wise is generally going to be, what is your measure of success? What is the positive outcome here? What can we benchmark this against? So breaking down those objectives for analysis, I do want to get a little bit technical here in the next couple of slides and talk to you a little bit about changing your approach to reporting. But before we change our approach to reporting, it's important to distill down and understand all of the ingredients and all of the technical nuances of essentially what we're working with. Now, breaking down the analysis that you've got into manageable parts generally starts with identifying a date span that you'll be analyzing. And I know we're talking about customer journey, but the date span is of paramount importance when it comes to narrowing down the customers, the journey, the steps, the phases that you want to take a look at. You want to identify the dimensions and metrics associated with the objectives of your analysis. And these are essentially, I'm using air quotes here, but raw ingredients. I think one of the challenges a lot of folks encounter as well with analysis is that there are over 200 different metrics, over 200 different dimensions, and any number of customizations that you can make to your reporting that essentially make up your raw ingredients. I'm hoping by the end of this webinar and by the end of this conversation, you guys have a bit of a better idea on how to hone in on the dimensions and metrics that matter the most to the questions you're getting asked. You're going to want to build key performance indicators around the data that you have. So narrowing down those dimensions and metrics, you're going to start to have little barometers in terms of what is your measurement of success or fail. You're also going to have accessible to you what I might call as quality indicators. So what makes a good customer versus an okay customer. Finally, you're going to want to leverage the tools such as advanced segments, the pre-built reports, and custom reports to provide unique perspectives on data that's important to you and your objectives. And last, and this is probably from an implementation standpoint, one of the most important steps I hope that all analysts do at the end of their reporting is identify any missing data points for collection optimizations to flesh out future reporting. So, and I've talked to a lot of folks before in the past about reporting. They'll put together reports. They don't have the ideal makeup of the data that answers the question as best they can. But a lack of information in certain areas is absolutely something you should incorporate into the feedback of your analysis and reporting on customer journey. So for example, if you say you're diving into how well campaigns are performing and you're missing certain cost information and you're missing certain campaign information, or even organizational or strategic information, that's something you do want to call out with whoever's asking that question or whoever's receiving that information. Now, getting familiar with your ingredients, and I mentioned before, these are essentially your raw ingredients. These are what are going to make up the meat and potatoes of all of your reports. And this is going to be review for some folks, but I know I was well into my analysis career before I finally sat down and thought through dimensions and metrics. What is the definition of them? And this is the easiest and simplest way that I can distill these down. Dimensions are descriptions of data. Metrics are measurements of data. Metrics are measuring dimensions. Metrics are anything that is quantifiable. So in any of the GA reporting, all of those columns to the right of any of those data table reports are essentially going to be your metrics. Any of the dimensions are going to be words. So it's words and numbers. Any words that are part of the dimensions are likely going to be a description of data. And yes, there are a few exceptions like browser version, screen resolution, that sort of thing. But anything that describes data is a dimension. Anything that measures data is a metric. So a great example dimension here is source, the location in which the user session originates from prior to arriving on your website. And then sessions, so the quantity of visits initiated by users. So source is something that can be measured or quantified by the number of sessions that comes through. Next, and this one's a big one to understand too, because it's going to have a huge impact on your reporting, the way that it's laid out. It can either layer in levels of confusion or it can layer in clarity. You want to categorize your ingredients by scope. And this isn't a matter of, I don't recommend grabbing a notebook and writing down every dimension and metric that's of interest to you and classifying them by scope. This is more of an approach and a philosophy to what you're doing. So first and foremost, the highest level one is a user, ideally representative of a single person that has sessions in your data. Now, Google Analytics and Google as a company has been pushing over the past several years to migrate more of their philosophy in their reports to be user-centric as opposed to session-centric. But we're of course hitting that technological barrier of cookies. This is a system very dependent on cookies. So essentially any cookie created for a user is a unique user in the data. This became a major notable problem when the rise of smart devices, such as tablets, such as iPhones, Android phones, desktops, so on and so forth. Great exercise I usually like to do when I'm doing a face-to-face presentation is I ask everybody, raise your hand if you have a personal desktop. Raise another hand if you have a smartphone. Raise another hand if you have a tablet. Raise another hand if you have a work laptop. And you'll see that quickly people run out of hands very fast. And for every hand that is risen that you raise personally, you are considered a user in the data. So there is some shortcomings to this that can be gotten around by certain integrations and tech solutions. Next up, you've got session, a visit to your website initiated by a user that is a collection of hits. So a user has a session or a visit. And then finally, hit, the individual interactions such as page views, events, and transactions conducted within a session initiated by a user. So hit is going to be the most granular scope that you can essentially apply. Now, again, there are a ton of dimensions and a ton of metrics out there. And thus far, we've talked about them from a purely technical capacity, which is very important to building out your analysis. However, when it comes to honing in on what data points are most important to understanding your objectives, a good mindset is to adopt is understanding how the data correlates to where the user is and the user journey and where the scope of your analysis fits in that journey. Now, before I move on, we talked a little bit about the technical aspects of some of our raw ingredients. And now I want to talk to you about, I guess, the main purpose of this webinar, which is the phases of the customer journey. But I just want to pause here for just a moment to see if there are any questions about the technical aspects, understanding user scope, the differences between metrics and dimensions. Okay, so no questions about that, which is great. So let's talk a little bit about the customer journey. And the customer journey, I like to think of as a cycle. And it starts at the top left here with the attraction phase. Goes from attract, moves through engage, convert, retain, and advocate. And after that, essentially transitions to a new user and a new cycle and a new process. Now, the attract phase is where I think the majority of digital marketers live. It's all about bringing the new customer into the website and getting them across that initial threshold of entry. If you imagine this as us running a brick and mortar store, and you had somebody outside with a sign that essentially was trying to entice people into the building. That first step, that story, is all about getting them through that front door. After that, it becomes in the customer's journey, they're now in the engage step. Customer is interacting with the various content, features, and brand. This can mean a wide array of things. So once they're through the door, they're interacting with the site or organization in some capacity. The app, clicking on buttons, perusing pages, reading content, spending time on the site. After that, they're going to migrate to convert. Now, at any point, you should probably pause here. They can jump out of this cycle and then jump back into it. So you'll have a user that may cycle out, may have to be attracted several times, may have a low engagement, higher engagement before they're finally pushed to convert. The convert is basically the step in which the customer achieves the key milestone objective of your organization. So they've make a purchase, they engage in some sort of transaction, they fill out a form, they reach out to a sales representative. Whatever the goal of your overall organization, hitting that convert step. Now, I did put in here that it achieves a key milestone objective, but there are going to be secondary objectives and other milestones that a user can hit that may not necessarily be the full transaction or full primary objective, but can still count as lesser conversions. After that, after somebody goes through convert, and when I initially saw this cycle, these steps, I thought, convert was the end of the line. That was the finish line for a customer journey. And once they achieved what I had them there to do, I thought they were done. But in reality, the more you think about it, you want them to keep coming back. So retain. Customers' individual relationship continues with your organization. So they keep coming back. They keep processing conversions. They keep jumping back into the cycle, engaging and converting on different conversions or higher quality conversions. Next step, and this is essentially the ultimate goal of every single marketer out there, is the customer proactively pushes other potential customers into the attract section of the cycle. So they become an advocate for your brand. Now, in the next couple of slides here, I'm going to dissect each one of these cycles and each one of these phases and how they pertain to different organizations and groups. Starting, of course, with the attraction phase. Attracting users to the organization. This is the objective of external marketing teams. Anybody that is essentially there to get people in through the front door and interacting with the site in some capacity is those teams' role. There are benefits from digital marketing integrations too, and more so with GA360 and a solid UTM tagging policy. This portion of the cycle, attribution is king. So the UTM tagging policy is, if it's on point, you have a much better understanding of the attract cycle. Now, the integrations that happen here also tell the story before the user arrives on your page. If you're operating in Google Analytics and within the Google stack of tools, such as Google Ads, DV360, so on and so forth, enabling those integrations allows you to see the user's journey during the attract phase when they haven't quite crossed the threshold. So there's some critical information available there in those integrations. Typically, the analysis you'll need to conduct here is going to be scoped against users and sessions. Attraction phase happens at the session level. You can have several different sources as you're coming into the site as a user multiple different times. Acquisition and audience reports house most of the relevant data here. So if you start getting questions around attraction phase, you want to narrow in on those particular reports, look at those scopes, and work with those benefits such as UTM tagging and integrations. And again, this phase is all about getting them through the front door. After they are through the front door, they essentially move into the engagement step. How long do they stay? This section of the cycle is typically owned by folks who are in the user experience and content management sections. These are your content generators. These are also your developers too, attempting to make features to get them to essentially entice them to interact with the page a little bit more. This does benefit from enhanced implementation tracking such as events and page velocity, as well as user engagement metrics, so on and so forth. This is generally scoped against hits. Now, as I mentioned before, scoping is monumentally important when it comes to building out these reports. If you are operating at a level that, or with data that is hit-centric, you can have a tremendous volume of information available. One of the requests I hear most common from people in terms of analysis is understanding essentially the customer journey on an individual scale aggregated into a visual. And that can be very complicated because you have all of these users traversing your site. It almost looks like a spaghetti bowl as people are moving through it. Typically, when it comes to working with this minute level of data at the hit level with a high volume of users and sessions, That's when you start venturing into the data science and BigQuery realms. Now, the behavior reports are going to house most of the relevant data. So if you are looking to understand user engagements, there are some reports outside of that, behavior reports. However, the hit-centric behavior reports are generally going to show engagements far better than most of the other reports in the system. Engaging the customer can increase brand awareness. Content consumption can be a secondary measure of success against some efforts. I love talking about this particular phase, mostly because I think it is one of the most challenging steps to understand. It does typically require the most technical integrations on the page, which is a lot about what I do here at InfoTrust. It also has a lot of secondary objectives in it. In the event that you cannot push them to convert, you can't get them across the finish line, a secondary prize is typically getting them more aware of your brand, getting them saturated in the material that you are providing, and essentially making them more aware of the content, the products, the information about your company. Next up is convert. And as I mentioned before, this is the primary objective of all organization members. This is what people are after in terms of an ideal outcome to a user's visit. And that's a great question to ask too, and one that I constantly bring up when I talk to stakeholders. What is your ideal outcome when it comes to a user visiting the site? I come in through the front door, your attraction phase is successful, I'm engaged, now what? What's the ideal outcome? And it's a really great blue sky thinking exercise. What is the best user I can possibly attract to my site and push them across to convert? Generally, this is going to be scoped against sessions. Conversions as a technical mechanism with goals happens at the session level. So when it comes to attribution of goal conversions, that's going to happen at sessions. And then, of course, the conversion reports house the most relevant data. And duh, right? You know, they're all in there. The e-commerce, the goals that you create. Customers achieve the key goal of a relevant effort. Now, I'm always very, very surprised when it comes to the configuration of Google Analytics. One of the best things you can do is arm yourself with a cohesive group of goals that are configured to your Google Analytics view. If you don't have those goals configured, the conversion reports will be completely barren of anything that's valuable. Now, I also put in here that conversion reports house the most relevant data, but conversions happen all over the place. Anything that is a session scoped report, since conversions happen at the session level, will have relevant goal information associated with that report, which is why, for example, you will see in the acquisition reports, you will see goal conversions. So it's a really great KPI for you to measure against in those reports as well. So since this is such a key aspect of this customer journey, and arguably one of the most important is making sure that they actually achieve the objective, it does permeate across a lot of the reports in Google Analytics. And as I mentioned before, any analysis you're doing should always be benchmarked against an objective or a conversion. Next up, we've got the retain cycle here. Typically an objective of email, social, or external digital marketing teams. I put email in here specifically too because as a first touch marketing channel, email doesn't excel, mostly because if your first contact with a user is via email, that could potentially just be spam, right? So typically email is good for newsletters and retaining folks, re-engaging them and putting them back in this cycle in some manner. This benefits from CRM integration and audience building integrations with GA360. One of the technical hurdles that you may be facing, or I see quite a bit with clients, and honestly, this is, I think, as an industry, as a digital analytics industry, this is where the majority of companies are at right now, is binding together their users across their different data lakes. So the CRM integration allows you to essentially track a user as a single person across sessions and devices, again, depending on the technical capacity of what you've got in play. And generally, this is going to be scoped against users and sessions. Typically, the acquisition audience reports house most of the relevant data here. When people see retain, the most common dimension that folks are going to use or adhere to is the user type dimension, which essentially says new visitor or returning visitor, which is a bit of an old school mentality right now, mostly because we are, again, at the whims of a cookie-based system. Now, as I mentioned with the CRM integration and the audience building integrations, this is all about tethering the user's experience across the different data lakes that you've got. So that user type dimension is, at least with me, quickly falling out of favor in terms of understanding the retention or user retention. And now it's more about user ID overwrite and CRM integrations. So last, turning a customer into a marketer. Typically an objective of email and social teams. And the reason why those teams are typically in this cycle or in this phase of the cycle is because they have a very shareable mechanism inherent in the medium that they operate in. This benefits from a solid UTM tagging strategy and affiliate programs. Now, not all of us are likely going to be part of e-commerce systems, but UTM tagging, and I know it's come up here quite a number of times. UTM tagging is monumentally important when it comes to attribution, especially understanding this customer journey, because it falls into play at the beginning and at the end of this cycle. And I even put here UTM tagging strategy and policy, and it's less about the technical nuances of using UTM parameters, and it's more so about adhering to the organizational standard of how those values should be populated and how they're consistent. One of the biggest benefits to UTM tagging is that you can put anything you want in the values that are there. You can put anything you want for source, medium, campaign, whatever. One of the biggest downsides is that people put whatever they want in UTM tagging and it becomes a complete mess. So if a big takeaway to understanding customer journey is making sure that you have a solid UTM tagging policy, you know, I'd be very happy if that's a lesson you walked away from this webinar with. Finally, acquisition and audience reports house most of this relevant data. And pushing a user through the journey into this step is the biggest achievement of a marketing team. It is the best outcome of success. Not only are they sticking around and converting, engaging with your brand, but they are essentially turning into free marketing or free marketers. So this is essentially replacing the offline world's word of mouth and recommendations from other folks. So definitely something that you want to push people into if you have, if you can. So those were the phases, and I dove pretty deep into some of those, and I'll just pause here for a moment to see if there are any questions that we can jump on before I move into essentially a case example. We're going to revisit the questions that we presented at the beginning to go through a case example of how you can break one of those down. And I'll just give you guys a moment to answer if you have any questions. Or ask if you have any questions. I'll answer. So you guys will be getting a copy of the deck. And if you do want to use these slides as a bit of a cheat sheet, you know, happy to provide that for you. Is there any way to utilize a user flow in GA as in the customer journey mapping? So the user flow report, or really any of the flow reports, they are, and this is a bit of personal opinion time, they are of limited use. the event flow, for example, behavior flow, user flow, they can get a bit messy. They do an okay job at visualizing some of the data that you already know, but in terms of discovery, they can be a little bit difficult to read. Now, the reason why the flow reports in particular are something I'm not too fond of is mostly because of scoping, right? As I mentioned before, the user is going to have sessions. Within the sessions are going to be hits, and those flow reports are very hit-centric a lot of the time. And typically the limitation of some of those flow reports are only showcasing the top 5 interactions, and then there's like this catch-all bucket that falls off at the bottom. So what ends up happening is you learn the most common top 5 paths, but for the most part, you're probably already going to know that or understand that. And this is where, as I mentioned before, like the data science aspects of this data need to come into play. Google Analytics as a tool, as an interface, excels at understanding users and sessions, but struggles a little bit with the volume of data coming from hit scoped dimensions. So if you guys are ever interested in understanding customer journey mapped out against user flow, typically the route that is suggested is exporting that data into BigQuery and then visualizing it in some capacity outside of the interface itself with something like Tableau, Data Studio, or your favorite BI tool of choice. I'm looking at the questions now. Let's see. So is the customer cycle you displayed really only applicable to e-commerce retail sites? What about CPG brand sites, for example? No, that's an interesting question. The customer journey, the way that this is broken down, is applicable across all verticals and across all types of sites. And sometimes it's just about, and I'm going to scroll back up to that overall cycle, is shifting perspectives a little bit. And just to be completely honest, one of the easiest sites to understand from an analysis portion is e-commerce. It's very clear objective, like make money, right? Sell products, sell widgets, do this, do that. Where things get a little bit more interesting in terms of analysis or understanding the customer journey comes sometimes where engagement is a big objective, almost conversion, right? And that's okay. Great example. One site I had worked on before, their business model was essentially the users themselves would provide the content for the page, and then the platform itself would serve ads to the users. It was essentially user-generated content on an ad-serving platform, and the ad-serving platform is essentially the company. Now, there's nothing to buy. There's no necessarily forms to fill out for the user. All they want is the users exposing themselves to more of the user's content so that they can serve more ads. So that's where engagement actually came into play as a really big conversion, because essentially the more pages that they visit, the more ads that they serve, the more revenue they make. So for that particular client, conversion was essentially page depth. So once they hit a certain number of pages, they were considered a highly engaged user and a quality conversion. Now, we set up additional steps or tiers. So if they hit 8 pages or 10 pages or 15 pages, they were different levels of conversions. So again, different verticals, different objectives. You just have to somewhat apply this to you. But it's always rung true. You always want people engaged, attracted, converted, retained, You want them to become advocates for your brand. But that's a great question. Okay, I don't think I see any other questions. So let's talk through, let's jump back to our initial questions here. And they were purposely vague and they were purposely high level. And I was purposely making it so it's that guy that walks up to your desk and asks you the most complicated blanket question you can. And I'm sure we've all have experienced that before. But with what we just talked about in terms of the customer journey and shifting the way that you think about these questions, you start to classify these as where in the customer journey is this question going to be narrowing in on. For example, how well are we doing at bringing in new business? That's all about attract. We talked about what reports to look at, what scoping to do that. You can start asking follow-up, intelligent follow-up questions to that to essentially drill down on where to look. And this is when you can start surfacing unique insights, is by having the ability to distill this down. Now, one that I do want to narrow in on, and like I said, because I'm a little bit biased, it's one of my favorite steps, is engagement. Mostly because, like I said, it does require some technical implementation, which is what I do a lot of. So, are our customers reading our content? And again, this is because e-commerce is pretty easy to understand. Did they buy it? Did they not buy it? So in this case example here, just at the top here, I showed like the overlapping cycles that you typically want to look at. Obviously, this is our customers reading our content is very clearly active in the engaged step of the journey. So as we talked about in the previous slides, you have a good idea of where to look, what scope to look, what reports to use. But there's going to be some overlap too with the attract phase and convert phase. You do want to head off initial questions or follow-up questions to that. To flesh out the story a bit more, you can showcase how those users are active in the steps before and after the cycle. We know that we will need to gravitate towards working with hit scope dimensions since content will vary page to page, and we can start identifying KPIs against this question, which we'll do next. So you can essentially, in terms of identifying the KPIs, and I know we talked a little bit about specific dimensions, specific metrics, but for something like engagements, for something that's hit-based, you can start looking at time on page, you can start looking at page velocity, all these sort of things. Now, what the right KPIs are for you are going to be dependent on how you drill down to the question that you initially get. For some folks, the measure of success, as I mentioned with my ad serving folks, was page depth or number of page views per session. If they were on a different technical platform where they serve ads based on every time increments, their measures of success or KPIs would be more around time-based metrics and dimensions. So on top of building that report and understanding what to showcase in that analysis based on where they're at in the customer journey, you can walk away with certain possible enhancements to that phase, and that's a really great outcome to any report. So I mentioned before, CRM integration, user ID tracking. Starting to combine that user across those sessions can bring in a wealth of more information. Google Stack integrations with GA360. Data collection enhancements too. You can narrow in on scroll tracking. You can get customized event tracking. You can get video tracking in place. These last two are a little bit more complicated, but engagement scoring. Engagement scoring is another thing I like to see quite a bit. Engagement scoring is essentially a customized number or score that you assign certain engagements, so that when you get asked a question about the engagement phase, you can give it a quantifiable value. So this user has 100 engagement score, so we want to raise that or prevent that from dropping. And then finally, page velocity. Page velocity is an interesting customization too. Essentially what page velocity is it allows you to see what pages a user is interacting with in terms of like a breadcrumb capacity, as well as give it a quantifiable number. So let's say, for example, I'm a user. I have a session that goes from A, B, and C, pages A, B, and C. What we can do then is we can essentially say page A has a page velocity of 3. So you get to understand by adding page velocity dimensions and metrics to your implementation, how certain pages are driving users into other pages. It's a very cool little enhancement. I do see another couple of questions here. Let me jump into, are you going to explain the value of Google Analytics 360? What extra value benefit do I get from 360? Yeah, that's a great question. Google Analytics 360 is essentially the enterprise version of Google Analytics. Now, Google recently has begun pushing a bit more of a holistic approach towards their marketing platform. They're calling it Google Marketing Platform. So this is where integrations come into play. This is where Google Analytics 360 as the enterprise version comes into play. With the idea that Google Analytics 360, the key benefit is that it serves as the hub of your data that's coming in across your different data lakes, across your different upstream advertising systems to give you a full spectrum story of what you've got. Now, 360 has other benefits such as volume-based benefits, less sampling, more data freshness, enhanced features in terms of more custom dimensions, more custom metrics. And one of my personal favorites is enhancements to the cost import. If you guys presently work with any data that is trapped in an offline point of sale system or an external data lake, you have the ability using cost import through GA360 to update historic data that previously didn't have that information. So there are a lot of benefits. And if you guys have any questions about Google Analytics 360, InfoTrust does provide licensing for GA360. So just feel free to reach out to either myself or anybody at InfoTrust, and we can connect you with more information. So another question here, is there a standard approach for engagement scoring and content scoring? Standard, sort of. There's a bit of a process to it. And engagement scoring essentially goes like this. The very first thing you have to decide when it comes to engagement scoring is you have to assign a quantified value to certain actions on the page. So let's say, for example, a page view. The base interaction, very simple, somebody views a page. That would have a low engagement score of, say, 1. Now, I hit 3 more pages, and as I'm moving through, my engagement score as a user has gone up to 3. Now, on that third page, the next thing that I do on the third page is fill out a form, and that fill out a form goes to the sales team, connects you with somebody who can essentially start selling you widgets, right? That would have a high engagement score, say like 50. So after I leave there, after I complete the form, my overall score is 53. Now, the process is essentially sitting down with the team and the group to identify what are the key actions and how can we assign a numeric value to those actions. After that, it gets technical. And what you want to do is you want to deploy out either typically via a tag management system like Google Tag Manager to stamp those numeric values to the actions coming in based on the organization's valuing of those, and then it becomes available in the data for you guys. I hope that addressed the question. I know it's a multi-step. I'm really paraphrasing quite a bit, but if you do have any more questions about engagement scoring, happy to follow up, via email or after this presentation. But these are great questions, guys. Do keep them coming. Which is actually time for questions. That's what I have for you today about the customer journey and the various different parts and mechanisms in there. Please do, take these slides, take this cycle and apply it to the way that your analysis works. One of the ways that I like to leverage customer journey as well is typically it's a great idea machine to get people thinking about key performance indicators. This is also a really great template for building out dashboards and business intelligence tools. So if you ever have reporting needs, thinking about your reporting in this cycle, presenting to groups of folks or putting up dashboards around the office that say, this is how well we're doing in attracting people. This is how engaged people are on our site. This is how our conversions are doing. It really speaks to people quite a bit. Julie asks, have you heard much of the G integration with stores? Stores, not so much. I think I'm a little bit more well-versed in some of the ad stack integrations such as DoubleClick. But no, I can look into it and answer that question offline if you'd like. You can just shoot me an email and I'm happy to provide some details. I am one of many people here at InfoTrust that works in integrations. So I have no doubt if it's there and if there's information out there, we likely have somebody that's already gotten their hands dirty and worked with in the past. So I'd be happy to provide you with more information there. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, but I can tell you a little bit more about just the crawl, walk, run, end-to-end analytics partners. We work with quite a number of clients, essentially migrating them through our customer journey, which looks similar to this, the crawl, walk, run. The industry over the years that I've been working in has changed quite a bit in terms of the needs of the agencies or the organizations and clients that I work with. And this is a really great way to break down where certain analytics shops and organizations are on the scale. Because there are many times where I've bumped into clients where the first thing they ask me for is, hey, can you do business intelligence dashboards? But they haven't gone through, say, the customized audit to monitor the tag governance strategy. They haven't made sure that their data is accurate and cohesive. So, if you are somebody who is interested in retaining some of our services around any of these items, please do let us know, reach out. We would love to talk to you a lot more. Additionally, too, data governance is a growing need for a lot of folks. We're doing an in-person workshop series, or we're hosting next month. If you're in or near Chicago, New York, or Cincinnati, I would highly encourage you guys to check out the data governance workshops on our website. So you can just go to infotrust.com/workshop. We'll be teaching on tag governance and the upcoming California Consumer Privacy Act, GDPR, and more. That's really been the big thing, I think, in the past year or two is understanding cookie privacy. I know it's come up quite a bit, just user cookies. So we're definitely going to talk a little bit more about how to handle those. We also, too, have some upcoming webinars. I would love it if you guys joined us again for some more discussions about, we have one coming up for the Google Cloud for marketers, as well as ITP and other browser cookie expiration changes. Cookies, right? It's like the hot topic nowadays. And I can tell you we are all over it in terms of understanding it. So whatever we're finding, what we're experiencing, we really do want to loop you guys in and convey it to you. So please do jump into some additional events here. But here's my contact information, guys. Just to reiterate, we will be sending out the deck. Feel free to reach out to me directly, either via email or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear any stories that you guys have about how you use this information, any interests that you may have in anything that we spoke of. I think one of the things that enhances my presentations the most is the follow-up conversations I have. So please do reach out to myself or any folks here at InfoTrust. We would love to stay in touch and communicate with you. But I have not seen any additional questions pop up, so I just want to thank you guys. I do have a poll that just popped up. Thank you, Jace, for reminding me there. But if you're interested in scheduling a follow-up and you haven't dropped into the chat already, just check that yes box and someone will reach out and talk to you. If not, we hope to see you again on a different webinar. But I'll leave this poll up for another minute or two. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us here today, and I hope to see you again soon.